Black lady said rich men can't please a woman. Until Billionaire whispered, "Try me," in her ear. I never expected my pain to go viral. When I stepped onto that TED stage in Atlanta, my hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the podium just to stay upright. The spotlight was blinding, and somewhere beyond that white-hot glare, I knew there were 2,000 people waiting for me to either inspire them or embarrass myself. I chose to bleed instead. "Rich men can't please a woman," I said into the microphone, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "And I'm going to tell you exactly why." The auditorium went dead silent. I could feel the tension ripple through the crowd like a wave. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, hungry for what I was about to say. I saw a few men in expensive suits cross their arms, their jaws already tightening with defensiveness. Good. I wanted them uncomfortable. "I'm not talking about money," I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. "I'm not talking about mansions or private jets or black cards with no limit. I'm talking about presence. I'm talking about emotional availability. I'm talking about a man who can sit with you in silence and make you feel like you're the only person in the universe." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. Rich men can't do that. And I know this because I loved one. The admission felt like swallowing glass. Even after 2 years of therapy, 2 years of rebuilding myself from the ashes of that relationship, speaking about him still hurt. But I had promised myself that I would be honest. That I would use my scars to light a path for other women who were lost in the same darkness I had once wandered through. "His name doesn't matter," I said softly. "What matters is that he gave me everything money could buy. Diamonds. Designer bags. A penthouse with a view that made me feel like I was living in the clouds. But you know what he never gave me?" I looked directly into the camera, knowing millions of people would eventually see this moment. Himself. The applause that erupted was deafening. Women stood up, tears streaming down their faces. Some clutched their chests like I had reached inside and grabbed their hearts. I saw a woman in the front row mouth the words "thank you" over and over again, her mascara running down her cheeks. But I wasn't done. "Ladies, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice rising with conviction. "Love is not a transaction. It's not something you can buy at Tiffany's or wrap in a Hermes box. Real love requires a man to show up, not with his wallet, but with his whole heart. And too many wealthy men have forgotten how to do that. They've been taught that money is the answer to everything. That they can buy their way out of intimacy. That a woman should be grateful just to be in their presence." I shook my head slowly. "I'm here to tell you that gratitude is not the same as fulfillment. And a woman who is showered with gifts but starved of affection is still a woman who is dying inside." The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. When I walked off that stage, I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. The video went viral within 24 hours. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone had crashed twice from the notifications. My social media accounts had gained over 100,000 followers overnight. News outlets were calling my agent, requesting interviews. Think pieces were being written about me in real time, some praising me as a revolutionary voice for women, others condemning me as a bitter man-hater with an axe to grind. I didn't care about either opinion. What I cared about was the truth. And the truth was that I had spent 3 years of my life loving a man who treated me like an accessory, something pretty to display at galas and business dinners, but never something to cherish when the cameras weren't watching. His name was Vincent. I met him when I was 26 years old, fresh out of journalism school and hungry to make a name for myself. He was 15 years older, devastatingly handsome, and the CEO of a tech company that had just gone public. Our paths crossed at a media conference in San Francisco, and from the moment he looked at me, I felt like I had been struck by lightning. He pursued me relentlessly. Flowers delivered to my office every day. Surprise trips to Paris on his private jet. A diamond bracelet that cost more than my entire year's salary, left casually on my nightstand after our first night together. I thought I had found my fairy tale. But fairy tales don't show you what happens after the happily ever after. They don't show you the nights spent alone in a mansion so big it echoed with your own loneliness. They don't show you the way a man can look right through you like you're made of glass. They don't show you the slow, agonizing death of your self-worth as you realize that you're not his partner, you're his possession. Vincent never hit me. He never yelled at me. He never did anything that would look like abuse from the outside. But he hollowed me out from the inside. He would go days without touching me, without looking at me, without acknowledging my existence beyond a perfunctory good morning mumbled over his coffee. When I tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, he would dismiss me with a wave of his hand and say, "Naya, I have a company to run. I don't have time for feelings." I stayed for 3 years. 3 years of convincing myself that I was being ungrateful. 3 years of looking at my designer wardrobe and my luxury apartment and telling myself that I had no right to complain. 3 years of watching other women envy my life while I silently screamed inside. The breaking point came on our 3rd anniversary. Vincent had promised to take me to dinner, a rare occasion, since he usually couldn't be bothered with date nights. I spent hours getting ready, choosing a dress that I knew he loved, doing my makeup with the precision of an artist preparing a masterpiece. He never showed up. I sat at that restaurant for 2 hours, watching couples around me laugh and hold hands and share bites of their food. The waiter kept asking if I wanted to order, his eyes filled with pity that made me want to disappear. I called Vincent 17 times. He didn't answer once. When I finally got home, he was in his office, typing away on his laptop like nothing had happened. "You forgot," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't even look up. "Forgot what?" "Our anniversary." He sighed, like I was a child interrupting him with something trivial. "Naya, I'll buy you something nice tomorrow. Just let me finish this." That was the moment I realized the truth. I wasn't his girlfriend. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't even his priority. I was his afterthought. I packed my bags that night and never looked back. The TED Talk was my revenge. No, that's not the right word. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking the pain that had nearly destroyed me and turning it into something that could help other women recognize the signs before it was too late. But I never expected it to attract the attention of someone like him. Cairo Laurent. I had heard the name before, of course. Everyone had. He was the youngest self-made billionaire in the country, a man who had built a tech empire from nothing and turned himself into a household name before he turned 35. The media called him the ghost because of how rarely he appeared in public. He didn't do interviews. He didn't attend parties. He didn't date publicly. He was a mystery wrapped in a designer suit, and the world was obsessed with trying to figure him out. I never expected him to be obsessed with me. 2 weeks after my TED Talk exploded, my editor at Luminary magazine called me with an assignment. "There's a luxury retreat in the Maldives," she said, her voice crackling through the phone. 3 days, all expenses paid. Some of the most influential people in the world are going to be there. We need someone to cover it, and after your viral moment, you're the hottest name in journalism right now. I hesitated. What kind of retreat? Wellness and networking. Very exclusive. Very private. The kind of thing where billionaires go to pretend they have souls. I laughed despite myself. That sounds like torture. That sounds like your next cover story, she corrected. Come on, Naya. This is exactly the kind of access journalists dream about. Get in there, observe these people in their natural habitat, and write something that'll make our readers question everything they think they know about the 1%. She wasn't wrong. My entire brand was built on exposing the emotional bankruptcy of wealthy men. What better way to prove my thesis than to spend 3 days surrounded by them? Fine, I said. I'll go. 3 days later, I was on a private plane to paradise. The retreat was called The Haven, and it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen in my life. Perched on a private island in the Maldives, it consisted of a dozen overwater villas connected by wooden walkways that seemed to float above the crystal-clear lagoon. The main building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and white marble and open-air spaces that blurred the line between indoor and outdoor. Everywhere I looked, there were lush gardens, infinity pools, and staff members dressed in white who seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts. It was heaven. Or at least, it would have been heaven if I hadn't been so acutely aware that I didn't belong there. I was used to nice things, my years with Vincent had made sure of that. But this was different. This was wealth on a level that most people couldn't even conceptualize. The other guests arrived in helicopters and private yachts. They wore clothes that cost more than most people's houses. They spoke casually about their third homes and their art collections and their philanthropic foundations like these were mundane topics of conversation. And they all knew who I was. I felt the stares the moment I arrived. Whispers followed me like shadows. Some people looked at me with curiosity, others with open hostility. A few women approached me to shake my hand and tell me how much my speech had meant to them. But the men, the wealthy, powerful men who populated this retreat like peacocks in a garden, they kept their distance. All except one. I first saw him on the second evening. The retreat was hosting a sunset cocktail party on the beach, and I had positioned myself at the edge of the crowd, nursing a glass of champagne and observing the guests for my article. That was when I noticed him. He was standing alone, slightly apart from the others, staring out at the ocean like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. He was tall, at least 6'3", with broad shoulders and a lean, athletic build. His skin was a deep brown, smooth and flawless, and his face was the kind of beautiful that made you forget how to breathe. Strong jaw. Full lips. Cheekbones that could cut glass. But it wasn't his looks that caught my attention. It was the way he held himself. There was a stillness to him that seemed almost unnatural. While everyone else around him laughed and mingled and performed the exhausting theater of social interaction, he stood perfectly still, his hands in the pockets of his linen pants, his eyes distant and unreadable. He looked like a man who had been alone for so long that he had forgotten how to be anything else. I knew that look. I had seen it in the mirror every day during my 3 years with Vincent. Before I could look away, his eye shifted and locked onto mine. The impact was immediate. Physical. A jolt of electricity that shot through my entire body and left me momentarily stunned. His gaze was intense, piercing, like he could see straight through my carefully constructed defenses and into the wounded heart I tried so hard to hide. I should have looked away. I should have pretended I hadn't noticed him. But something about those eyes held me captive, and I found myself unable to break the connection. He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. And then, impossibly, he smiled. It was just a small curve of his lips, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But it transformed his entire face. Suddenly, he didn't look distant or untouchable. He looked almost human. I felt my heart skip a beat. No, I told myself firmly. Absolutely not. I had not come to the Maldives to be charmed by yet another wealthy man with a pretty face. I had come here to write a story. To expose the emotional emptiness that lurked beneath the surface of all this glamour. To prove, once again, that money couldn't buy the things that truly mattered. I tore my gaze away from his and forced myself to focus on my champagne. But I could still feel him watching me. We finally spoke on the third day. I was sitting on the deck of my villa, my laptop open in front of me, trying to organize my notes into something resembling a coherent article. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, and the lagoon below me sparkled like it was scattered with diamonds. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't hear him approach. "You're the TED Talk woman." I looked up sharply, and there he was, standing at the edge of my deck like he had materialized out of thin air. Up close, he was even more striking than he had appeared from across the beach. His features were sharp and precise, almost regal, and his eyes were a deep brown that seemed to shift between warm and cold depending on the light. "And you're the billionaire who's been staring at me for 2 days, I replied, keeping my voice cool. "I was wondering when you were going to work up the nerve to actually speak." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or amusement. He clearly wasn't used to women who talk back. "Cairo Laurent," he said, extending his hand. I stared at it for a long moment before reluctantly accepting the handshake. His palm was warm and rough, not the soft, manicured hands I had expected from a man who spent his days in boardrooms. "Nia Carter," I said. "But you already knew that." "I did," he admitted, releasing my hand. "I've watched your speech approximately 12 times. I raised an eyebrow. 12? That's either dedication or obsession. Maybe both. There was something in his voice that made me pause. A raw honesty that I hadn't expected. Most wealthy men who approached me after my TED Talk came with defensiveness, with arguments, with attempts to prove me wrong. But Cairo didn't seem defensive. He seemed curious. Why? I asked. Why what? Why did you watch it 12 times? He was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting out toward the horizon. The sunset cast his face in shades of gold, softening his features, making him look almost vulnerable. Because, he said finally, you were talking about me. I blinked. Excuse me. Your speech. Every word of it. He turned to look at me, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. You weren't just talking about the man who hurt you. You were talking about every man who has ever used money as a substitute for connection. Every man who has ever been so afraid of vulnerability that he hid behind his wealth. Every man who has ever convinced himself that being successful means being untouchable. He took a step closer. You were talking about me, Naya. And it made me realize something I've been running from my entire life. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What? He leaned in, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something warm and spicy and intoxicating. Close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Close enough that his breath ghosted across my skin when he spoke. That I've been using money to hide from everything real. From connection. From intimacy. From love. His voice dropped to a whisper. From myself. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Your speech made me angry at first, he continued. I wanted to prove you wrong. I wanted to show up here and demonstrate that a man like me could be everything you said we couldn't be. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something raw and honest and terrifying. But then I saw you. And I realized I don't want to prove anything. I just want. What? I breathed. He held my gaze, and I saw something in his eyes that I didn't expect. Not arrogance. Not lust. But a loneliness that mirrored my own. A desperate, aching hunger for something real. I want you to try me. The world around me stopped. If you think a man like me can't please a woman, he whispered, his lips mere inches from my ear, then try me, Naya. Let me show you that I'm not what you think I am. Let me prove that not every wealthy man is empty inside. I should have pushed him away. I should have told him that I had heard these promises before, from Vincent, from all the men who thought they could charm their way past my defenses. I should have reminded myself of all the reasons I had sworn off wealthy men forever. But there was something in his voice, a tremor of vulnerability that cut through all my resistance. This wasn't a man trying to seduce me. This was a man asking to be seen. And despite everything I had been through, despite every wall I had built around my heart, I found myself wanting to see him. One dinner, I heard myself say, "You get one chance to change my mind." The smile that spread across his face was unlike anything I had expected. It wasn't smug or triumphant. It was relieved. Grateful. Almost boyish. One dinner, he agreed. I promise you won't regret it. I wasn't so sure about that. Dinner with Cairo Laurent was nothing like I expected. I had prepared myself for the usual wealthy man experience, a Michelin-starred restaurant, an obscenely expensive bottle of wine, conversation that circled around his accomplishments and my appropriate amazement at all of them. I had dressed strategically, wearing an outfit that was attractive but not inviting, professional but not cold. I had rehearsed my defenses, ready to shut down any attempt at seduction. But Cairo didn't take me to a restaurant. He took me to the beach. When I arrived at the meeting spot he had specified, I found a simple setup waiting for me, a blanket spread on the sand, a basket of food, and a bottle of wine that looked decidedly mid-range. Cairo was sitting cross-legged on the blanket, still wearing the linen pants and white shirt he had been wearing earlier, his feet bare. He looked up at me and grinned. I hope you weren't expecting something fancy. I stared at the setup, completely thrown off balance. I wasn't expecting this. Good. He patted the spot next to him. Sit. I made the food myself. You cook? My mother taught me before he stopped abruptly, and something shadowed crossed his face. Before she passed. I was 12. The admission was so unexpected, so raw, that I found myself sinking onto the blanket beside him without thinking. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No one does. He opened the basket and began pulling out containers. It's not exactly the kind of thing I share in board meetings. Good morning, everyone. Before we discuss the quarterly reports, let me tell you about my tragic childhood. I laughed despite myself, and he smiled, a real smile, not the polished version I had seen him display at the retreat. What's in the basket? I asked, eager to steer the conversation away from something so painful. Jerk chicken. Rice and peas. Plantains. He opened a container, and the smell that wafted up was incredible, spicy and sweet and unmistakably Caribbean. My mother's recipes. I've been making them for 23 years now, trying to keep her memory alive. I accepted the plate he offered me and took a bite. The flavors exploded on my tongue, complex and comforting and absolutely delicious. This is incredible, I admitted. Don't sound so surprised. But he was grinning, clearly pleased. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The sound of the waves was soothing, rhythmic, and I felt some of my tension begin to ease. This wasn't what I had expected. This wasn't what wealthy men did. Can I ask you something? Cairo said eventually. Depends on what it is. The man you talked about in your speech. The one who gave you everything except himself. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were serious. What happened to him? I set down my plate, suddenly not hungry anymore. Why do you want to know? Because I need to understand what I'm up against. What he did to you. What I need to prove I'm not. His honesty was disarming. Most men would have avoided the topic entirely, preferring to pretend that my past didn't exist. But Cairo was looking at me like my pain mattered to him. Like he wanted to understand it, not erase it. His name was Vincent, I said quietly. We were together for 3 years. What was he like? I stared out at the ocean, watching the moonlight dance on the waves. Perfect, at first. He was everything I thought I wanted. Successful. Charming. Generous. I paused, the old wounds aching. But perfect was just a mask. Underneath it, he was cold. Distant. Incapable of real intimacy. How so? He could buy me a diamond necklace worth $50,000, but he couldn't remember my birthday without his assistant reminding him. He could fly me to Paris on a whim, but he couldn't sit with me for 10 minutes without checking his phone. He could tell the world that I was the love of his life, but when we were alone, he looked at me like I was furniture. My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for it. 2 years of healing, and Vincent could still make me cry. Cairo was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed his hand over mine. The touch was gentle, almost tentative, like he was afraid I might pull away. He was a fool, he said softly. I looked at him, expecting to see pity in his eyes. Instead, I saw anger. Real, genuine anger, not at me, but for me. I know men like Vincent, Cairo continued. I've sat in boardrooms with them. I've done business with them. And I've watched them treat the people in their lives like transactions. Like everyone around them exists to serve their needs, to boost their egos, to be discarded when they're no longer useful. He tightened his grip on my hand. I swore a long time ago that I would never become like them. But somewhere along the way, I think I did. His voice dropped, heavy with shame. I've never treated anyone the way you describe. I've never had anyone to treat that way. Because I've never let anyone close enough to hurt. Why not? He was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, slowly, he said, because everyone I've ever loved has left me. And I decided that the only way to survive was to stop loving altogether. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and painful and utterly human. In that moment, Cairo Laurent wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't the ghost. He was just a man, a wounded, lonely man who had built walls so high that he couldn't see over them anymore. Just like me. My mother died when I was 12, he said quietly. My father was never in the picture. I grew up in foster care, bouncing from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. By the time I aged out of the system, I had learned one lesson better than any other: the only person you can rely on is yourself. How did you become this? I gestured vaguely, encompassing his wealth, his status, everything. A bitter smile crossed his face. Desperation. Rage. The bone-deep need to prove that I was worth something. I started my first business at 18, failed spectacularly, and started another one. And another. And another. I worked 20-hour days. I sacrificed everything: friendships, relationships, my health, all because I was convinced that if I could just make enough money, I would finally feel like I mattered. Did it work? What do you think? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the answer written in every line of his face. The exhaustion. The loneliness. The hollow ache of a man who had achieved everything and found that it meant nothing. No, I said softly. It didn't work. No, he agreed. It didn't. We talked until the sun came up. I had never done that with anyone before, not even Vincent. But with Cairo, the conversation flowed effortlessly, jumping from topic to topic like stones skipping across water. We talked about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. We talked about the masks we wore and the wounds we hid. We talked about everything and nothing, and by the time the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt like I had known him my entire life. It was terrifying. Because I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I wasn't supposed to open up to another wealthy man, no matter how different he seemed. I had built my entire identity around the idea that men like Cairo were incapable of real connection, and here he was, proving me wrong with every word he spoke. I should go, I said reluctantly, watching the sunrise with heavy eyes. I have a flight to catch in a few hours. Cairo nodded slowly, but he didn't move. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between wonder and sadness. Will I see you again? He asked. The question was simple, but I heard the weight behind it. He wasn't asking about logistics or schedules. He was asking if I was willing to take a chance on something real. Every instinct I had screamed at me to say no. To protect myself. To run before I got hurt again. But there was something in his eyes, that same loneliness that mirrored my own, that made me hesitate. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever this is. That's fair. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch impossibly gentle. But for what it's worth, Naya, I think you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. And I'm not ready to let you go. My heart clenched painfully in my chest. Cairo. You don't have to answer now. He stood, offering me his hand to help me up. Just promise me you'll think about it. Promise me you won't close the door completely. I took his hand and let him pull me to my feet. We stood there for a moment, face to face, the tension between us almost unbearable. I'll think about it, I said finally. His smile was slow and beautiful and heartbreaking. That's all I ask. I thought about it. For 6 weeks, I thought about nothing else. Back in New York, I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the memory of that night on the beach. I wrote my article about the retreat, a scathing expose on the emotional emptiness of the ultra-wealthy, but I left Cairo out of it entirely. I couldn't bring myself to reduce him to a caricature. Not after everything he had shared with me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him out of my head. He texted me every day. Not flirtatious messages or attempts at seduction, just simple check-ins. How are you? Did you eat lunch? I saw this article and thought of you. Each message was a tiny reminder that he was still there, still waiting, still hoping. It was the most persistent courtship I had ever experienced. And it was the most confusing. Just go out with him already, my best friend Jade said one night, exasperated by my constant overanalyzing. What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is that I fall for him, open up completely, and he turns out to be exactly like Vincent, I replied. And I don't know if I could survive that again. Jade reached across the table and grabbed my hands. Naya, listen to me. You can't spend your whole life protecting yourself from pain. That's not living, that's hiding. I'm not hiding. I'm being cautious. Girl, you wrote an entire TED talk about how wealthy men can't love properly. And then you met one who's doing everything right, and you're running scared. She squeezed my hands. Maybe it's time to admit that you're not as healed as you think you are. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Because she was right. I had spent 2 years telling myself that I was over Vincent, that I had processed my trauma, that I had emerged from that relationship stronger and wiser. But the truth was, I had just built higher walls. I had turned my pain into a philosophy, my wounds into a weapon. And now, when someone was trying to offer me something real, I was too scared to accept it. That night, I made a decision. I texted Cairo, I'm ready to give this a real chance. His response came immediately, I'll be in New York tomorrow. Dinner. I smiled despite myself. Dinner. What followed was the most beautiful 3 months of my life. Cairo moved at my pace, never pushing, never rushing. He flew to New York every weekend to see me, always arriving with small, thoughtful gifts, a book he thought I would like, flowers from a street vendor near my apartment, a playlist of songs that reminded him of me. He remembered every detail I ever mentioned, from my favorite coffee order to the name of my childhood pet. But more than the gestures, it was the time he gave me that mattered. Unlike Vincent, who had always been too busy for emotional connection, Cairo seemed to have an endless capacity for presence. He listened when I talked, really listened, with his whole body leaning forward and his eyes fixed on mine. He asked questions about my work, my friends, my dreams. He shared his own struggles with vulnerability, admitting when he felt scared or overwhelmed or unsure. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. You're different than I expected, I told him one night, curled up on my couch with my head in his lap. His fingers were threading through my hair, slow and soothing. Different how? I expected arrogance. Entitlement. The usual billionaire ego. I tilted my head to look up at him. But you're not like that at all. You're almost humble. He laughed softly. I'm a lot of things, Naya. Humble isn't usually one of them. But with you. He paused, his expression growing serious. With you, I want to be better. I want to be the man you deserve. My heart swelled with emotion, and I reached up to cup his face in my hands. You're already becoming that man, Cairo. I see it every day. He leaned down and kissed me, soft and slow and full of promise. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. I love you, he whispered. I know it's too soon, and I know you might not be ready to hear it, but I need you to know. I love you, Naya Carter. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. I should have said it back. In that moment, with his vulnerable confession hanging in the air between us, I should have told him that I loved him too. But the words stuck in my throat, trapped behind years of fear and self-protection. I'm getting there, I said instead. Just give me a little more time. He smiled, patient and understanding. I'll wait as long as you need. 3 weeks later, my world collapsed. It started with an email. An anonymous message sent to my work account with the subject line, you should know who you're really dating. I almost deleted it without reading. I received threats and hate mail all the time, the price of being a public figure with controversial opinions. But something made me pause. Something made me click. What I found inside destroyed everything. The email contained documents. Dozens of them. Financial records. Legal filings. Newspaper clippings from years ago. And at the center of it all, a name that made my blood run cold. Vincent Hughes. My ex-boyfriend. According to the documents, Cairo Laurent and Vincent Hughes had been business partners for the past 5 years. They had co-invested in multiple ventures together. They sat on the same board of directors. They had been photographed at events together, shaking hands and smiling like old friends. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was a transcript of a conversation, a recording that had been made at some kind of private party. In it, 2 male voices were discussing a woman. Me. Have you seen that TED Talk? The one about rich men not being able to please women. That's Vincent's ex Naya something. She's going to be at the Maldives retreat next month. Vincent mentioned it to me. Did he now? And what exactly does he want you to do about it? A pause. Then. He wants me to make her fall for me. Prove that everything she said was wrong. Make her look like a hypocrite. That's cold, even for Vincent. That's revenge. She humiliated him publicly. He wants to return the favor. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with tears. The words swam in front of me, rearranging themselves into a truth I couldn't escape. Cairo hadn't found me by accident at the retreat. He had been sent there. By Vincent. To destroy me. I don't remember the rest of that day. I know that I left work early. I know that I walked home in a daze, barely aware of the traffic or the noise or the people around me. I know that when I got to my apartment, I sat on the floor for hours, clutching my phone and staring at Cairo's contact information. Part of me wanted to call him. To scream at him. To demand an explanation. But another part, the part that had been shattered by Vincent, the part that I thought I had finally healed, already knew the truth. This was who wealthy men were. They didn't love. They strategized. They didn't connect. They manipulated. And I had been foolish enough to believe that Cairo was different. When my phone rang later that evening, his name lighting up the screen, I didn't answer. I couldn't. What was there left to say? He called 7 more times that night. Left for voicemails. Sent a dozen texts, each one increasingly frantic. I ignored them all. The next morning, he showed up at my door. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. I could feel his presence on the other side, heavy with desperation. Naya, please. His voice was muffled through the door, but I could hear the pain in it. Please, just let me explain. There's nothing to explain. My voice was flat, emotionless. I had cried myself empty the night before. I know everything, Cairo. I know about Vincent. I know about your little plan. Silence. Then. Where did you hear that? Does it matter? The point is, I know. I know you were sent to seduce me. To make me look like a fool. To punish me for embarrassing your business partner. Naya, that's not. He stopped, and I heard him exhale heavily. Okay. Yes. When I first went to that retreat, it was because Vincent asked me to approach you. He wanted me to charm you. Make you reconsider your opinions about wealthy men. I laughed bitterly. So you admit it? I admit that's how it started, he said urgently. But that's not how it ended. The moment I actually talked to you, the moment I looked into your eyes and saw who you really were, everything changed. I wasn't playing a game anymore, Naya. I was falling in love. How convenient. It's the truth. Is it? I pressed my hand against the door, wishing I could push him through it. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you played me perfectly. You said all the right things, made all the right gestures, and I fell for it. Just like Vincent wanted. Naya, I am not Vincent. His voice cracked with emotion. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I know I made a terrible mistake. But everything I felt, everything I still feel, is real. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything. I stepped back from the door. Leave, Cairo. And don't contact me again. Naya. I said leave. There was a long pause. Then, quietly. I'm not giving up on us. I know I hurt you, and I know you have every right to hate me. But I also know that what we had was real, even if it started in the worst possible way. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if that's what it takes. I heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway. And then I finally let myself break. For 3 weeks, I tried to move on. I blocked Cairo's number. I deleted all our photos. I threw away the gifts he had given me, even the ones that had no monetary value, the handwritten notes, the pressed flowers, the paperback copy of my favorite book with his annotations in the margins. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a lie. That the man I had started to love had never existed. That the connection I had felt was just another manipulation, executed perfectly by a man who had been trained to deceive. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memories. The way he had looked at me on that beach in the Maldives, like I was the first real thing he had seen in years. The way he had held my hand while I cried about Vincent, his grip gentle but steady, like an anchor in a storm. The way he had whispered "I love you" with tears in his eyes, his voice trembling with a vulnerability that couldn't be faked. Could all of that have been an act? I wanted to believe it could. It would have been so much easier to dismiss him as a villain, to categorize him alongside Vincent and every other wealthy man who had disappointed me. But something wouldn't let me. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, Vincent himself. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his number appearing on my screen like a ghost from the past. I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the reject button. But curiosity won out over common sense. "What do you want?" I said flatly. "Naya." His voice was smooth, confident, the voice of a man who had never questioned his own worth. "It's been a while." "Not long enough." "What do you want, Vincent?" "I wanted to check in on you. I heard you had a little falling out with Cairo Laurent." There was something ugly in his tone, a barely concealed glee. "Such a shame. You two seemed so happy." My blood ran cold. "How did you know about that?" "Oh, didn't Cairo tell you? He and I go way back." Vincent laughed, and the sound made my stomach turn. "He was supposed to seduce you and make you look like a hypocrite. But it seems he got a little too caught up in the role." I closed my eyes, the confirmation hitting me like a physical blow. So it was true. It was all a setup. Of course it was. Did you really think a man like Cairo Laurent would be interested in you for any other reason? Vincent's voice dripped with condescension. "Please, Naya. You're a pretty face and a viral video. You're not exactly in his league." I wanted to hang up. I wanted to scream at him. But something in his words snagged my attention. "Wait," I said slowly. "You said he got too caught up in the role. What does that mean?" A pause. Then, with obvious irritation, "It means he went off script. He was supposed to date you for a few months, get you to publicly reverse your stance on wealthy men, and then dump you in the most humiliating way possible. But instead, he came to me 3 weeks after you two met and said he couldn't do it." My heart stopped. "He what?" "He said he was out. Said he had actually fallen for you, if you can believe that nonsense." Vincent snorted. "I told him he was being ridiculous. That you weren't worth throwing away our business relationship. But he didn't listen. He cut ties with me entirely, pulled out of all our joint ventures, resigned from the board, everything." I sank onto my couch, my legs suddenly unable to support me. He pulled out of your businesses. He tanked a $200 million deal because of you," Vincent spat. "I hope you're happy. You've managed to ruin everything, just like you always do." But I wasn't listening anymore. Cairo had walked away from Vincent. He had sacrificed $200 million, and what was probably a significant portion of his professional network, because he couldn't bring himself to betray me. He had done the one thing Vincent would never do. He had chosen me over money. I hung up on Vincent without saying goodbye and immediately pulled up my email, rereading the anonymous message that had started this entire disaster. "You should know who you're really dating." I had assumed the message was from someone trying to help me. A whistleblower. A good Samaritan. But now, looking at it with fresh eyes, I saw it for what it was. A weapon. Sent by someone who wanted to destroy my relationship with Cairo. Someone who had access to confidential business documents and private recordings. Someone who stood to gain from keeping us apart. Vincent. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. Vincent had sent that email. He had leaked those documents, carefully edited, no doubt, to exclude the part where Cairo had refused to continue the scheme. He had wanted to make sure that even if Cairo wouldn't destroy me, I would destroy the relationship myself. And I had played right into his hands. I found Cairo in the last place I expected, a homeless shelter on the Lower East Side. It had taken me 2 days to track him down. His assistants wouldn't take my calls, and his public appearances had been cancelled indefinitely. But one of my journalist contacts had mentioned seeing him at a charity event, and a little digging had led me here. The shelter was crowded, filled with people lining up for a hot meal. And there, in the middle of it all, was Cairo, not sitting at the head table like a visiting dignitary, but standing behind the serving counter, ladling soup into bowls with a focus that made him look almost monastic. I watched him for a long moment, my heart aching. This was not a man putting on a show for the cameras. There were no cameras here, no press, no one to impress. He was simply serving. Quietly. Humbly. Like this was exactly where he belonged. You're going to burn a hole in his back if you keep staring like that. I jumped, startled by the voice. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and grey-streaked hair was standing beside me, smiling knowingly. I'm sorry, I stammered. I was just looking for Cairo. She nodded toward him. He's been coming here every day for the past 2 weeks. Ever since things fell apart with that woman he was seeing. My throat tightened. He told you about me. Told me. The woman laughed softly. Honey, that man hasn't talked about anything else. He's convinced he lost the love of his life because of a mistake he made before he even knew she was going to change everything. I blinked back tears. He said that. He says it every day. She studied me for a moment. You're her, aren't you? Naya? I nodded, unable to speak. Then you should know something. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. That man over there? He grew up in this very shelter. When he was 14, he stayed here for 6 months after his last foster placement fell through. And when he made his fortune, the first thing he did was donate enough money to keep this place running for a decade. I stared at her, stunned. He never told anyone about his past, she continued. He was too ashamed. But he never forgot where he came from, either. He comes back every year on the anniversary of his mother's death to serve meals and talk to the kids who remind him of himself. She smiled. Does that sound like a man who only cares about money? I shook my head slowly. Go talk to him, she urged. Whatever happened between you two, it's worth fighting for. I can see it in your eyes. I approached him cautiously, my heart pounding with every step. He was so focused on his task that he didn't notice me until I was right in front of him. Hi, I said softly. He looked up, and the expression on his face nearly broke me. Hope and pain and longing, all tangled together in a single glance. Naya. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in days. What are you doing here? I talked to Vincent. His expression shuttered immediately, fear flickering in his eyes. What did he tell you? Everything. Including the part where you walked away from a $200 million deal because you couldn't go through with his plan. Cairo set down the ladle, his hands trembling slightly. I should have told you myself. From the very beginning, I should have been honest about how we met and why I approached you. But I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you would never give me a chance. And by the time I realized I was falling for you, it felt impossible to explain without losing you. So you just hoped I would never find out? No. He shook his head firmly. I was going to tell you. The night I said I loved you, I had the whole confession planned. But then you said you needed more time, and I thought if I could just show you who I really was first, the truth wouldn't matter as much. He laughed bitterly. I was an idiot. Yeah, I agreed. You were. His face fell, and I felt a pang of guilt. But so was I continued, stepping closer. I should have let you explain before I shut you out. I should have trusted what I felt instead of assuming the worst. I was so scared of being hurt again that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. And what was that? I reached up and placed my hand on his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight stubble that told me he hadn't been taking care of himself. You, Cairo. The real you. The man who makes his mother's recipes and volunteers at homeless shelters and falls asleep holding my hand like he's afraid I might disappear. The man who has every reason to be closed off and bitter but chooses to be vulnerable instead. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he made no effort to hide them. "I love you," I said, the words finally breaking free. "I was too scared to say it before, but I love you, Cairo. And I don't want to lose you because of something that happened before we even knew what we could become." He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly that I could barely breathe. But I didn't care. I wrapped my arms around him and buried my face in his chest, feeling his heart pound against mine. "I love you too," he whispered into my hair. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Then let's be terrified together," I said. "Let's stop running from each other and start running toward something real." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears and overwhelming love. "Together," he repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. "Together," I confirmed. And when he kissed me, right there in the middle of a homeless shelter with dozens of people watching, I knew that this was just the beginning of a story that would last a lifetime. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of healing and discovery. We didn't rush back into the relationship where we had left off. We started fresh, building something new from the foundations of honesty and trust. Cairo told me everything, every detail of his arrangement with Vincent, every moment he had considered coming clean, every sleepless night he had spent wrestling with guilt. And I listened. Not because it was easy, but because I finally understood that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing someone, flaws and all, and committing to grow together. But before we could fully move forward, there was one final piece of unfinished business. Vincent. I confronted him at a tech gala 3 weeks after my reunion with Cairo. He was holding court in the corner of the ballroom, surrounded by sycophants who laughed at his every joke and nodded at his every pronouncement. When he saw me approaching, his smug smile faltered. "Naya. What a surprise. I bet." I stopped directly in front of him, aware that everyone in the vicinity was watching. "I know what you did, Vincent. The email. The edited documents. The whole thing was designed to break us up." His eyes darted around nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? So if I were to tell these lovely people that you conspired to manipulate and humiliate a woman just because she publicly embarrassed you, they wouldn't believe me." The blood drained from his face. "You wouldn't. Watch me." I turned to the crowd, raising my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. 3 years ago, I dated this man. He gave me everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. And when I spoke publicly about my experience, he was so wounded by his bruised ego that he convinced his business partner to seduce me as part of a revenge plot. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "But here's the thing Vincent didn't count on," I continued. His business partner, Cairo Laurent, for those who don't know, fell in love with me. Really fell in love. And when Vincent pressured him to continue the scheme, Cairo walked away. He gave up a $200 million deal because he refused to hurt someone he cared about. I turned back to Vincent, whose face was now a deep shade of crimson. "That's the difference between you and him, Vincent. He chose love over money. You could never do that." I smiled sweetly. "Enjoy your evening." I walked away without looking back, and the sound of shocked whispers followed me out of the ballroom. Cairo was waiting for me outside, leaning against his car with a nervous expression. "How did it go?" "I think I just ended Vincent's social career," I said, grinning. "Oops." He laughed, a real, genuine laugh that lit up his entire face. "Have I mentioned how much I love you?" "Not in the last hour." I wrapped my arms around his neck. "Feel free to remind me." He kissed me under the city lights, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along. Not a man who could give me everything, but a man who was willing to become everything, with me, for me, because of me. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. Epilogue 1 year later. I stood on the TED stage once again, the lights hot on my face, 2,000 people waiting for me to speak. But this time, my hands weren't shaking. 1 year ago, I stood on this very stage and told you that rich men can't please a woman, I began. I was speaking from pain. From betrayal. From 3 years of loving someone who couldn't love me back. I paused, letting the memory wash over me. I stand by everything I said. There are wealthy men out there who have lost the ability to connect, who use money as a substitute for vulnerability, who believe that presence is something that can be purchased. Another pause. But I also need to tell you something else. Something I learned the hard way. And that is this: people can change. I looked out into the audience and found Cairo sitting in the front row, his eyes fixed on me with pride and love and unwavering support. 1 year ago, I met a man who proved me wrong. Not by arguing with me. Not by buying me expensive things. But by showing up, every single day, with his whole heart. By doing the work, on himself, on us, on the wounds that had kept him isolated for so long. I smiled, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I'm not here to tell you that money doesn't matter. It does. But I am here to tell you that wealth is not a death sentence for the soul. People can learn. People can grow. People can choose love over fear, connection over isolation, vulnerability over protection. I took a deep breath. My name is Nia Carter. I wrote off an entire category of men because of one bad experience. And then I fell in love with a billionaire who showed me that the only thing more powerful than money is the courage to change. The applause that erupted was even louder than it had been the first time. But I barely heard it. Because Cairo was standing now, pushing through the crowd to reach the stage, and before I knew what was happening, he was on one knee in front of 2,000 people and 1 million live stream viewers. Nia Carter, he said, his voice trembling with emotion, you challenged everything I thought I knew about myself. You made me want to be better. You taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts, it's about showing up, every day, with an open heart. He pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, and exactly what I would have chosen for myself. Will you marry me? I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, laughing and crying at the same time. 1,000,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto my finger and pulled me into his arms, and the crowd went wild. But all I could see was him. All I could feel was the certainty that we had found something rare and precious, something that had survived lies and betrayal and all the wounds we had carried into our relationship. We had found each other. And that was the greatest twist of all. The end. Love may not have a price tag. But healing? Healing will cost you everything you've spent your life trying to protect. And it's worth every single penny.